All black, everything, everything black. Culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back, black.
Welcome to Left of Black, Season 15. My name is Anthony Neal. We're here at the Duke University Chapel and within the crypt at the University Chapel, and we are honored to welcome Professor Ashon Crawley, who is a professor of religious studies and African Studies at the University of Virginia. He's the author of Black Pentecostal Breath, The Aesthetics of Possibility, Fordham University Press, an investigation of aesthetics and performance as modes of collective and social imagination, and also the author of The Lonely Letters, published by our friends here, Duke University Press, an exploration of the interrelation of Blackness, mysticism, quantum mechanics, and love. And he's currently working on a third book, tentatively titled Made Instrument, about the impact of the AIDS crisis for Black social life. He is also, right, because we could go on here, he is a Yaddo Interdisciplinary Arts Scholar, a McDowell Interdisciplinary Arts Fellow, and a New City Arts Initiative Fellow, a Lit Artist Fellow, and his work has been featured on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., at the 2nd Street Gallery and Welcome Gallery, both in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the California African American Museum, both in Los Angeles. How are you doing, Ashon?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. It's a joy to return to Duke and to be in conversation with you. So.
Yes. You are visiting us as part of the inaugural Cohen Visiting Professorship, which brings together prominent scholars who spend a year visiting both Duke and UNC.
Yeah.
How's it been so far?
It has been a great experience, very wild. I was not expecting to receive an email inviting me to be the Cohen visiting professor for the year, and when I received the email, it said that they wanted someone who could have focused the work throughout the year on concepts of the American South and art. And it felt like a good synthesis of things that I had been doing, a lot of things that I'd been thinking about, a lot of things that I'd been writing, and a lot of my artistic practice as well. And so I came here this Tuesday, and since Tuesday I have been having meetings, have done some writing, did a presentation on Wednesday, and all of the conversations that I've had, the conversation that we had on Wednesday, with the conversation, with the talk that I gave, everything has been really generative. It's been really useful for my own thinking. I'm trying to think these days about architecture and the use and abuse of architecture and how peoples are impacted by various practices of architectural design. And just the conversations I've had have been really thoughtful. They've really prompted my imagination. And so my time here has been really good. I've learned a lot, but it's also been very, it's been a lot. I'm introverted, and so it's been a lot of energy that I've been giving to be in public with so many people. Yeah.
This is also a homecoming for you?
Very much, very
Your
much.
2013 PhD here at Duke University.
Yes.
How's it like to come back on the yard?
It's nice to come back. It's nice to come back to a place where you had good experiences. I like to tell people I had a really good experience in grad school. I had a supportive committee. I enjoyed the coursework, perhaps more than other people did. I enjoyed the process of writing the dissertation because I felt like I had the kind of support that through the difficult parts, I could ask them questions and they could help me reframe when I was experiencing difficult spots that I was trying to think through. And so it wasn't that I had a bad experience here at all. I had a really good experience as a student. But it is nice to come back as a faculty member of another university, to experience the other side of what it means to be on the other side of a doctoral education, to go to faculty meetings, things of that nature. It's nice to walk the campus and to feel sort of grown up. And it's nice to walk a campus where it was a place that was very formative for a lot of the thinking and the artistic practice that I'm currently engaging. A lot of those thoughts, a lot of those practices were really prompted by my time here, so it's been really nice to return.
You know, I find it a challenge to narrate your work and your career. You know, Dream Hampton once said about the late Greg Tate is that he had a mind that was like a laptop that had 60 tabs open. And you strike me as having that kind of mind, right?
Thank
Because,
you.
when I first met you, you were a literature student.
Yeah, very, yeah.
Here at Duke, right? Who had also had some training, in divinity, was interested in religious themes. And when you returned, a few years ago to give a talk, you were writing about the Hammond B3 organ,
Yes.
and this is after Black Pentecostal breath had come out. How would you describe yourself as a scholar? Because it's clear, right? You are a polymath, right? And I think about that importantly now because you are of a generation of Black thinkers and Black artists who could imagine that kind of trajectory in your career. There's a book out. There's a piece in New York Review of Books about Ralph Ellison and his photography, right? And it was a part of his career that he had to mute. Because as a writer, right, he could only be in one lane, right? There was no way for a Black artist to think of themselves to be in multiple lanes. But you very clearly are a polymath, right? But also doing some very complicated stuff in each of the very different lanes that your creativity finds its voice.
Thank you. Well, I think of myself primarily as a performance theory person, insofar as I'm really interested in how we do or activate or put things into process. I've really been influenced by the collection of lectures that J.L. Austin published, How to Do Things with Words. It's a very interesting little collection of lectures, but I really enjoy it because in his work is where I first encountered the idea of the performative utterance, which is, words do things, or certain kinds of words have the capacity to do things. And the example that he primarily uses is the wedding ceremony. You take this person to be your lawfully wedded spouse. You say, I do. The other person says, I do. And his argument is that the saying of the I do is the practice or the doing of the actual marriage. And his work gets taken up in so many different ways, but one way it gets taken up is in gender and sexuality studies with folks like Judith Butler, who would argue that gender is performance, and so it's the thing that you do, it's the thing that you activate. And so I've been really impacted by these ideas that there are ways that what we do actually produces impact in the world. And having grown up Black Pentecostal, I was very familiar with trying to live the thing or trying to do the thing or trying to practice the thing that you believe. And so in these various modalities, I ended up learning that performance is about efficacy. It's about putting into practice a certain kind of theoretical ideology or an imagination. And so when I think about my writing or I think about my sound art practice or my visual art practice, I'm constantly thinking about how they can do things, because they all feel like they emerge for me from the same curiosities, the same questions, the same conundrums they're trying to think through. And I'm producing different objects that can hopefully allow me to feel things, to sense things, to get closer to a certain set of ideas that I'm hoping will be generative to prompt my own imagination and my own thinking towards justice, and hopefully others as well. And so if I frame myself within performance theory, it has always felt like writing is a performance and painting or choreography is a performance, and the creation of music or even the production of an installation, these are all performances insofar as there are activations trying to do things, trying to make impact, and trying to compel people to be in relation to them.
I want to talk about your visual practice for a moment, because for a lot of folks who followed your career, it was unexpected.
Yeah.
How long had you thought about being a painter? Right? And was it something you thought about when you were younger and might have given up on for whatever reasons?
So when I was younger, I wanted to be a little Bob Ross. I used to watch The Joy of Painting.
A lot of times I start a painting and have nothing in mind but the time of day and the time of year.
There were other painting shows as well.
And everyone remembers Bob Ross.
Everyone remembers the afro,
Right.
you know, and the calm voice who put you to sleep. I loved watching The Joy of Painting pretty much daily. There was also the show about perspective drawing, Mark Kistler.
Here you are, laying on the comfort of the soft grass. You're looking up at the view, and you're watching all this action, blue jays flying back and forth, coming in for a landing, robins diving through the forest.
When I was in elementary school, my parents bought me a paint set, acrylic paint set, and I tried to do a lot of the paintings similar to what I saw Bob Ross do, even though he was using oil paint, so it was much more difficult for me to do it with acrylic paint. But as a child, I really did like drawing, I liked painting, but it's an expensive hobby to take up. And so I wasn't able to keep up with it in ways that I desired as a young person. When I was an undergrad, I took 2 photography courses and 2 architecture courses, loved both of those courses, or loved those 4 courses when I took them. But like when I was a young person, I was self-funding my university studies, and so it was very, very difficult for me to be able to afford photography and architecture, buying plexiglass, buying wood, buying paper, buying film.
Right, this is before digital.
This was all before digital. I loved the dark room. The dark room was one of my favorite places to be. The sound of the dark room, the smell of the dark room, it forced you to slow down. I really enjoyed the habits of practicing art, but there is a cost that is associated with it that makes it prohibitive. And so I gave it up again, and I ended up in 2017 moving from California to Virginia to take the job at University of Virginia. And I had recreation time. I wasn't in the car as much, and I also had paint in my house that I had purchased and never used. And so I decided to try to use my extra time to start engaging my artistic practice again. And in many ways, engaging the artistic practice in 2017 felt like I was finally prepared to do a lot of the things that I had been imagining, that I had been writing
Explain
about.
that. That's fascinating. Yeah.
So in 2010, I began writing a collection of semi-fictional letters to myself, to a person named Moth, who is a composite character of people that existed and did not exist. I would write these semi-fictional letters about everything: music, about sound, about the feeling of Pentecostalism, about queerness. I was really trying to think through a lot of concepts.
And this is while you were right before you come to grad school.
This is right before. It was 2010, so I was in my second year of grad school. I had read Nathaniel Mackey's From a Broken Bottle, Traces of Perfume Still Emanate, was really moved by his use of the epistolary to think about things like music. And so I started writing these letters to a fictional character to think about things like music, sound, the church, and queerness, joy, love, heartbreak. And a friend of mine sent me a video in 2010 of a little girl painting. She was 3 years old at the time. And she had blue paint on her hands, and she started clapping over the canvas. And I ended up writing one of these fictional letters about a painting process of listening to Pentecostal praise breaks from YouTube and painting with these Pentecostal praise breaks, either clapping the hands with paint to the rhythm or dancing on paper or canvas to the rhythm of people shouting or praising choreographically. I never tried it though. And so in 2017, when I had this extra time, I decided to try to see what would happen when I started reading the letters again. I decided to try to do the thing that I had written about in 2010. And so I started using paint, acrylic paint, on paper, and I would slip and I would almost fall. And it was not really useful it felt very different than I thought it would feel. It felt more difficult for me to get into the practice because I felt embarrassed trying to do this shouting thing that I would do in church, but doing it on paper with paint.
And embarrassed even though you're there by yourself.
Embarrassed even though I'm by myself, self-conscious even though I'm by myself, but also really afraid that I'm gonna fall because the paint is slippery. Right. And so I started using pigment powder, And when I started using the pigment powder, it really emerged to me as a practice that I could take seriously. And so I would put on headphones while listening to a praise break that I could find on YouTube. And I would pour the pigment powder on a piece of paper, and I would start dancing on it as if I were in church with other people. I would turn up the volume as loud as possible so that I could lose myself in the sound of the saints praising as if I were with them. And I would continue to push the pigment into the paper, and I would pour more pigment onto the paper, and I would do this for hours. And these sort of abstract landscapes would be the result of this practice of me pushing this pigment powder into the paper. I would also take paint and put it on my hands and clap my hands to the rhythm of these praise breaks. I would take a tambourine and pour paint on the tambourine surface and play the tambourine and let the paint splatter. My apartment got very, very messy. I didn't get my deposit back, but it was a joyful experience because I was finally able to release myself into the practice and stop feeling self-conscious about it.
You know, the thing that I find really fascinating about that is, you know, this is 2017, so that there's so much happening around new technology.
Yeah.
And folks are using movement in conversation with digital technology.
Yeah.
I think about the work of Thomas de France, that's just kind of mapping this kind of movement. And yours is more old school and analog.
Yeah, very, yeah.
What was it about the tactile aspect of, particularly as I'm thinking about the pigment powder?
Yeah. So one, I should say, don't use pigment powder if you're ever going to do this because pigments are dangerous, I found out.
Toxic.
They are toxic because they are often made of metal, and as someone at an art store thankfully told me, I was dancing with my bare feet, and they said, this is very likely seeping through your skin, going into your bloodstream, and making its way to your liver, so you do not want a collection of metal in your liver. I had to find a different solution. I started using eyeshadow, which has been actually really good because it's non-toxic. You can use it in the body, you can use it on the body, and it just looks nice. But I liked the tactile because the thing that I was really attempting more than anything else was feeling. I wanted to feel the same kind of sense for spirit that I felt when I was in these churches. When I was a member of a church and I was a musician, I was very known to be a praiser. I was very happy to get up off the keyboard.
And if you could unpack that for some of our boys, because you know, some of us, we hear praise break and we know exactly what you're talking about. Other folks are like, what's that?
So in a Pentecostal, in a Black Pentecostal context, a praise break is a moment in the church service where there is praise that happens in the flesh. People clap their hands, people shout, which is a kind of dance rhythmically. The music is fast-paced, it is repetitious, and often the movements happen in a way that are exuberant and joyful.
The music is an instigator.
The music instigates, it upholds, and it pushes all at the same time. The music is so deeply necessary and important for the kind of praise that people can actually experience. The music ends up being immersive because it's so loud. If you know anything about the mechanics of a Hammond organ, the musicians typically pull out all of the drawbars or all of the metal sliders that make the instrument as loud as possible. Because in these moments of praise, in these praise breaks, you really want an intensity of fervor and enthusiasm. And so the music helps that to happen. And people dance which we call shouting, within that context. And so I would do these praise breaks in my living room, in my apartment. And then I started doing them in my studio when I had a studio. I've done them in multiple places. And so the thing that I was attempting is the feeling of enthusiasm that I would feel in church services, and that was always tactile. Even if you're shouting or dancing on carpeted floors, you still feel, there's still a tactility to it. And so I wanted to, as much as possible, feel the things, but I am hoping in the future to use some digital mapping tools too, that while I'm doing these very sort of tactile, physical practices, to map it also with digital tools and technologies that have become available since I first started.
I want to talk, you mentioned the Hammond B3, so we're going to have to go there. The project that you're working on now, Made Instrument, which started as a project about the Hammond B3, but it's so much more now. You know, I'm thinking about all the conversations we're having for people who unfortunately have to listen to contemporary R&B music.
So sorry, y'all. Some of it is okay, I guess.
But what becomes very clear in listening to many of these artists, and there's so few groups now, is that they were not trained how to sing in the Black church, right? And there are lots of reasons for that, right? The church hasn't been Black church has not been accommodating to young folks. It has not been accommodating to queer folks. It has not been accommodating to secular folks, even though that's kind of the mission of the Black church, right? And we take for granted the impact that folks who did come through the church had on the secular world, right? So it's all that part of it. But they're also about these people who you're writing about who were in the church, right? The musicians, right, who happened to be queer. And they disappear because of the AIDS crisis, right? So it's literally like this, almost this double thing that's happening in the Black church. Talk a little bit about this project, because it's just, for me, really, really fascinating to think about, you know, these Black queer bodies who themselves become instruments.
So I began this project in many ways probably when I was a young person, thinking about the musician at our church growing up. My brother was a musician, and seeing the dynamics play out where it was becoming clear to me without any language for it that the musician in the church service had a lot of power, that the musician wasn't just the person that the pastor was in charge of, but that the pastor had to have a relationship with the musician. And in Black churches that are Pentecostal, Charismatic, Baptist, often the lead instrument was the Hammond organ, if there was an organ in the space.
Do you think he'd come? Come on, the one and only Billy Preston. Give him a great big God bless you, everybody. Billy Preston. Oh, Lord. Ye show. Leave us alone. Oh, Lord, my God.
The preacher and the pastor had to have a good working relation. And so I began to notice these power dynamics and sometimes power struggles between pastors, preachers, and then the musicians. And then the older I became, the more I just began to notice and pay attention. And I really became intrigued by what is this instrument that it holds so much sway in Black churches. You can go to small storefront churches and see a Hammond organ. You can go to large cathedrals and see a Hammond organ. What is it about the sound of this instrument that has meant so much that you can hear it on recordings from Aretha Franklin, commissioned? You can hear it in contemporary gospel. You can hear it in old school gospel. You hear baseball games. You hear it. You hear it in jazz. You hear it in blues. You hear it in rock and roll. You hear the sound of this instrument everywhere. And I had begun working on this book in earnest in 2018 when I was a fellow at the Institute of Sacred Music at Yale. And spent the entire year there, was, working on some abstract concepts, trying to think about just the musicality of the musicians that were playing this instrument that I knew. And we had a symposium for the Hammond organ in April of 2019. And one of the speakers was Fredara Hadley, who teaches at Juilliard, and a dear friend of mine. And she ended her talk by saying, "This part isn't in my talk at all, but I'm glad that we're talking about musicians and we're talking about queerness in the Hammond organ." She said, "I grew up in Florida, and I remember so many of the musicians were dying and no one was talking about it. And so I'm glad that, we're taking time to talk about this instrument and these musicians." And when she said that, it shifted what the idea of the book was for me in a dramatic way. At first I thought, okay, I can write a chapter about sort of the AIDS crisis and the Hammond organ. It's still my favorite instrument. I love to listen to it all the time. But the more I began to write into one chapter, the more it became apparent to me that what I needed to do was to write an entire sort of history of the AIDS crisis through the way it impacted musicians, singers, and choir directors in the Black church. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your process. I think sometimes younger scholars don't think about the fact that to do this, you have to balance your life with the work and the demands that are made upon you by the institution that you're tied to. Is there a daily writing process for you? Are you both writing and painting at the same time, or do you see them as such discrete activities that you really have to do them in different moments and different spaces?
I think people would be surprised. I do not listen to music when I write. I can't. Because it gets in the way of me thinking about what I'm trying to say about music.
Now, I can't write without music.
For me, I get really caught up in what's happening musically. I am primarily, I think, a visual and a sonic learner and not a text-based learner. And so there are very few things that I do daily that are for any profession, including writing, including reading, including painting. I am the kind of person that has to have a variety of things. And so some days are writing, some days are reading, some days are painting, some days are thinking. But when I do the things that I do, so the writing days are really, really long writing days, and they are not just brain dumps, they are really me trying to literally through my writing think through ideas and concepts. And so I sit with ideas for a long time, and then I write a lot in what seems like a short amount of time. But my reading actually is the time where I take a lot of notes and I do a lot of my thinking. And the writing that I do is the time that I do a lot of the sort of connecting of the ideas and trying to make things coherent, and a lot of the editing. I typically am able to incorporate an art practice at the same time that I'm able to write. And so as I'm writing, I don't have to take days off in order to paint. But with this particular project, because it came on the heels of HOMEGOING, which was the installation at the National Mall, which was also a memorial for musicians, singers, and choir directors who died of AIDS complications. That was such an emotionally difficult project to come to fruition. It took a lot out of me emotionally, mentally, physically. Just the process of composing music and designing the installation and working with a music producer, musicians. It was a lot of work in a short amount of time. Once I was done with the installation and I turned my attention towards the book, I haven't done any real artistic practice that is visual and sonic only. But I'm really close to having this draft of the book done. I have about a couple more words to say for this last chapter. And literally, as I began to come towards the end of this draft, artistic ideas have begun to emerge, things that I can do, processes that I know I want to engage, some music that I'm trying to write, I'm trying to do a new sonic memorial. And so there are things that literally I think they've been waiting for a kind of clearing, and I think that we are really close to that clearing. Yeah.
Your appointment at UVA is in religious studies and also in African and African American studies. How do you feel about the field these days?
I feel about the field these days like I feel about universities, that there are some possibilities for generative conversation and that there can be a lot of pitfalls because of what seems to be the financialization of university life, when the concerns tend to be about how many seats or how many people can we get to sit in our classrooms so that we can make sure that we get enough money for our departments. I understand the need for the question, but the need for the question feels like it becomes primary as opposed to what are the things that we are trying to teach, what are the questions we are trying to ask, what are the curiosities that we are trying to prompt in our students. And so for me, I feel like there are some spaces of liberatory possibility in both of the fields in which I am a part. And I feel that also there are some real possible pitfalls if we think that the work that we do is for the institutions in which we are a part. I think of the work that we do as the institution is a conduit for a certain set of relations to emerge and to become possible, but the work that we do isn't for the upkeep of these institutions. I think that they are for the possibility for prompting us toward a different kind of world.
What are you thinking about? I mean, what are the questions that you're asking now?
I think
that really most drive you, know, provide anxiety.
Yeah.
And ambivalence, and the only way that you're going to be able to come to terms with it is intellectually. What are those questions that are driving you these days?
You know, I was with some students a couple of weeks ago, and I said to them, I think that a good summary for the work that I try to do is to ask the simple but not simplistic question, why are they so mean to us? And the they and the us can change, but
Talk about that a little bit.
But the question is the real curiosity around why is it that certain people are empowered by political and economic forces to be unkind to another group of people? One of the major sort of theoretical concepts that I'm working through in this book about the AIDS crisis is unkindness. Unkindness cannot be measured, there's no metric for it, but the people who experience it feel the impact of it. And so what does it mean to experience something that is immeasurable, but that makes you feel demoralized, that makes you sometimes internalize those messages so that you also feel the thing that they say about you. And so I'm constantly trying to think about our affective orientation to the world, our mood, our emotional register, because emotions for me are very important things to pay attention to. They orient us, they give us direction, they give us focus, but they can also really confuse us. And so I'm trying to think about, in specific historical moments, who is empowered by politics, by economy, by nation, who's empowered to be mean to other people, who's empowered to be unkind to other people, what is the process by which that unkindness happens, and how does that unkindness actually get transformed into policy, how does it become transformed into law, into procedure, such that it can become systematized and systemic and institutional. And so in the art that I'm doing, I'm trying to think about unkindness and why are they mean to us. And in my writing practice, and the they and the us often is why are like non-black people mean to black people? Why are non-queer people mean to queer people? Why are men people unkind to non-men people? So like, it's really trying to think through the various ways that we create these categories of difference, and often the creation of the category of difference in the service of being unkind to whoever is constituted by that difference.
Yeah, I mean, in the spirit of that, I'm thinking about, Not Like Us,
Yeah.
Summer,
Yeah,
and the Drake and Kendrick thing. And while it clearly was something that was very personal for Kendrick, I think part of the reason why it resonated the way that it did is because it was such an open-ended signifier.
Yep. And it could be not like us, in you get to choose who the us is.
Us is.
And in order to say you are not like whoever us is. And so also wanting to be really attentive to how us as a concept actually continues to shift and move, and how that often is a consequence of convenience and not of ethics. And really trying to think about the ethical creation of a we, the ethical creation, like what are the ethics that are necessary to create a we that is expansive and that is justice oriented, as opposed to a we that is exclusionary and that is predicated on the ongoing violence against others to make sure that they are not included in things like having a good life, having food, having shelter, having, all of the things that we need, like water and air.
We've been joined today by Professor Ashon Crawley, Professor of Religious Studies and African American Studies at the University of Virginia. Thank you for joining us, Ashon.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk.
Blacks, they be hyping, I'm the light that lit your match. A black watch for all the times I watch MTV raps. Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black, culture over everything.